Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, no safe place to go. The Congolese city of Goma is a canvas of violence and chaos since M23 rebels entered the city on Monday. Millions of civilians are paying the price. I speak to the ICRC about the humanitarian stakes. And as Congolese forces struggle to hold out against the M23 and the Rwandan forces backing them, some of the civilians fleeing a city with streets reportedly now littered with bodies head over the border into the very country accused of inflaming the conflict. There were protests in the Congolese capital on Tuesday as demonstrators turned their rage on embassies amidst the escalating conflict in the eastern city of Goma. There was a call to paralyze Kinshasa from young Congolese who blame Goma's invasion by Rwanda-backed M23 rebels on a failure to act by the international community. Ugandan, Belgian, US and French embassies were amongst those attacked amidst the marches on Tuesday. Congolese mistrust of diplomatic efforts has ratcheted up as hundreds of thousands of people raced to leave Goma after the M23 closed in last week and entered on Monday in a lightning offensive that's left Congolese forces and UN peacekeepers on the back foot. At least 17 have been killed so far, a number that's likely to rise.
These truck drivers were transporting aid from the World Food Programme into Goma when the fighting broke out. Caught in the crossfire, they had no choice but to turn back and managed to safely reach the Rwandan border.
We saw and heard terrible things. Dead bodies, gunshots, bombs, things that we'd never experienced before.
Ongoing fighting has left the North Kivu capital facing a major humanitarian crisis and potential food shortages. The World Food Programme announced Tuesday it had to temporarily suspend its operations in the area, while several aid agencies said their warehouses had been looted. The city is also experiencing power and water outages, and hospitals are struggling to cope with the influx of injured patients. According to the UN, many civilians and humanitarian workers have been affected or directly targeted by the fighting, including reports of widespread sexual violence.
We are hearing reports of health workers being shot at and patients, including babies, being caught in crossfire. WHO reminds everyone that attacks on healthcare violate the rules of war.
The UN on Tuesday called on all parties to urgently agree to a ceasefire and to set up a humanitarian corridor to facilitate the evacuation of around 1 million civilians still living in Goma.
Now, medical staff in Goma are overwhelmed. About 300,000 people who had been sheltering on the outskirts of the city fled into it as front lines began moving over the weekend, adding to the millions in the city unable to flee and caught up amidst the bullets and bombardments. The fighting and road blockages have pushed Goma's already stretched medical capacity to its limit. The International Committee of the Red Cross runs the city's main hospital and has set up tents for the influx of the wounded. I'm joined in now by its Africa director. Thanks so much for making the time to speak to me today, Patrick. So what can you tell us about what your teams are saying about how this escalation in the conflict is affecting Goma's people?
Well, they're very concerned. Our teams on the ground are extremely concerned about the fighting in and around Goma, particularly because of the use of heavy explosives in the densely populated city, as well as in the internal displacement sites in its outskirts, has a devastating impact on men, women, and children, and who are basically and simply trapped. And this month, the number of wounded received in the medical facilities we work with is 6 times higher than the number we received only in December 2024, with more than 600 people received, almost half of whom are civilians. As many have seen, including on your TV screens, the chaos in Goma with thousands of people fleeing their homes with the bare minimum is quite shocking. These people will need water, will need food, and most importantly, a safe place to protect their families and their children.
The ICRC's also expressed some concern about the short and long-term impact of this conflict on infrastructure. Why are you so worried about that when faced with the immediacy of human suffering?
Well, today we sounded the alarm on the potential damage that the National Institute for Biomedical Research in Goma could have if not protected and its cold chain not preserved because of the electricity cuts. While fuel has been provided this afternoon to this facility, we keep asking the parties to protect it. The same should apply to all essential infrastructure like water treatment plants or hospitals. You know, if damaged, these installations will not provide the vital services people need, leading potentially, again, to death or illnesses. Hence, it's important that the fighters abide by the rules of war and respect lives, livelihoods, but also the infrastructure meant to serve the people. And in this regard, we're in regular contact with the warring parties, reminding them of these exact obligations under the Geneva Conventions, but also under customary law and any human logic to preserve indeed what is meant to serve the people.
And practically, tangibly on the ground, what has the ICRC been able to do in the midst of all of so many shifting fronts of dangers and risks? What have you been able to do in terms of impacting what's happening?
Well, quite a lot. If you, even including on your TV now, we've seen pictures of the volunteers of the Red Cross of the DRC being extremely active. Our teams as well, we're on the ground and we're increasing support as much as the situation allows. We spoke before about the health conditions. Our team, together with the hospital staff, have been treating people with mortar and shrapnel wounds. Many of them have head wounds and chest trauma. It's extremely disturbing. You know, they are transported by exactly the volunteers of the Red Cross. And whether in Dosho, in Goma, the referral hospital of Beni, but also in Bukavu, all structures are currently over-occupied, and steps are being taken by our teams to expand that capacity by, for example, transforming the dining hall of Ndosho Hospital into an inpatient ward, or even setting up tents outside to accommodate more patients, and using car parks as triage areas. But I would also add that in addition to their physical pain, several injured people have lost contact with their loved ones. That's just the tip of the iceberg. I assume that many people today have lost contact. So our teams try to reunite these families, and in the meantime, as a first step, provide communication means so that they can inform their families of their whereabouts and their conditions.
Now, Patrick, we don't have very much time, but you touched upon how, some of the work that you do is to be in touch with all of the belligerents. In a region that is notorious for the abuses on civilians suffered amidst conflict, do you have much hope? What have you been telling the belligerents, and do you have much hope that that's going to have an impact in the way that this conflict's being played out from the perspective of civilians?
Well, it's exactly the essence of our work, is to make sure that the rules of war are not just left on paper, but that are taken very seriously and actioned by the commander to his staff, to his teams on the ground. You know, the Geneva Conventions are not optional for weapon bearers. We're convinced, especially in the DRC, in the east of the DRC, that tensions will only decrease if those who fight respect the basic rules of the laws of war. We've already heard about victims of sexual abuse and other forms of abuse in the last decades in DRC, and we really hope, and that's why I'm hopeful, that the warring parties act in full responsibility and allow those who have decided not to be part of that war and are just bearing the brunt of that war to feel protected by those who are fighting.
Thank you very much. Patrick Youssef there, the ICRC's Africa Director. Well, days of intense fighting has escalated the humanitarian crisis in the province, as we've just heard from our correspondent and from Patrick Youssef from the ICRC. Many of Goma's people who have tried to get to safety have crossed the border into neighbouring Rwanda. That's where our Clément Duroma is. He sent us this report from Gisenyi.
This Tuesday, fighting along the border between Rwanda and the DRC stopped by mid-morning. Some of the refugees waiting to flee the clashes between the M23 and the Congolese army in Goma managed to cross through the Grande Barrière border in Gisenyi, the Rwandan border town where I've been spending the past few days. Over 1,200 refugees were guided by the authorities to a makeshift camp on the outskirts of the city. I managed to speak with Luke, a young Congolese man who found himself trapped in the fighting while visiting friends in Goma.
I was trapped. There were bullets everywhere, corpses everywhere. I thought, what's happening to me? It was very hard. I sheltered in my house. There was nowhere to go. There were stray bullets everywhere that could hit me.
The camp where Luke is now located can accommodate around 12,000 people, according to Rwandan authorities, who are preparing for a massive influx of Congolese refugees in the coming days. Several thousand have already crossed the two border points linking Gisenyi to Goma. On Monday, many were stranded as intense fighting raged at the border between the two countries. According to Kigali, at least 5 civilians lost their lives due to shellfire and stray bullets that landed on the Rwandan side.
Clement Duroma there for us in Rwanda. Now, former Gambian dictator Yahya Jammeh says that he's not done with politics yet. He's recently declared that he plans on returning to take back control of his party. His 22 years of rule were marked by violence and torture, but he's been in exile in Equatorial Guinea since losing the 2017 election. Our regional correspondent tells us more.
Gambia's exiled dictator Yahya Jammeh has told supporters, quote, "Whether anybody likes it or not, by the grace of Allah, I am coming back." Speaking in a voice note, the former leader said he hopes to lead the party, APRC. It's not clear whether this is a commitment for him to physically return back to the Gambia, given the former leader's been living in exile in Equatorial Guinea since 2017, after he lost the presidential election to Adama Barrow. The APRC, his party, still wields some power in the Gambia, given that Adama Barrow was elected for the second time in 2021 after a pact with Jammeh's party.
I think the only reason Jammeh's audio messages are significant is because of the failure of the situation at home. He would be subjected to arrest and prosecution. So he definitely will not come back. But then he is singing about I'm coming back by force and nobody can stop me. I think that's a bluff, all right. But the reason he is saying that because also this government has not taken any step since 2017 to get him back, to extradite him. So in a way, for me, Jammeh is Jammeh today, simply because the government created that enabling environment for him to say the things he is saying.
A spokesperson from Jammeh's party, APRC, said they would welcome the leader's return. They said, quote, that people are longing for his homecoming, whereas others I spoke to said they only hope the leader returns to be brought to justice, as just last month, ECOWAS backed the creation of a court that will judge the crimes, the atrocities committed during Jammeh's rule.
And finally, a creative collective of artists from Guinea and its diaspora have been tackling the complex and emotive issue of female genital mutilation in their latest show. The piece, performed in Marseille, here in France, looks at the difficulty and damage that can be caused to women by the tradition. Take a look.
With agile and precise movements, these acrobats slide, balance and climb in a near mystical atmosphere. They're members of Cirque Baobab, a Guinean circus troupe, and are performing their latest show, Yongo Yeli, a name given to those who perform genital mutilation.
Guinea is the third country in the world where excision is practiced the most. It affects 96% of women.
Blending circus performances, musical theater, and excerpts from interviews conducted in Guinea, the show revolves around the practice of female genital mutilation. A largely taboo topic, yet the practice remains widespread in Africa and is often carried out at a very early age. All of the women on stage have experienced this rite of passage to adulthood. Mariama Siresuma was only 6 years old.
As we grow up, we understand a lot more about life. Myself, I told my grandmother, if I had known these things when I was 16 or 17, I wouldn't have accepted it.
After a triumphant premiere in Marseille, Circus Baobab will take their new show on tour across France in February.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa for now. Thanks for joining us, though, and do so again if you can. Till then, take care.